Hey there, and a massive welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're a Year 9 student gearing up for your biology exam, I want you to take a deep breath and just relax, because you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're totally chucking out the dry textbooks. I'm going to give you your ultimate, jargon-free survival toolkit for your test. We're going to treat this whole topic, variation and natural selection, like an epic survival video game. By the end of this, you are going to be an absolute pro at understanding exactly how the natural world levels up. All right, let's dive straight in.
Here is our game plan for your revision. First, we'll uncover the secrets of variation, then look at competing to survive. After that, it's adapting to the environment, seeing natural selection in action, facing off against a modern boss fight in the rise of superbugs, and finally, protecting Earth's biodiversity.
Boom, let's go.
So level 1, the secrets of variation, or as I like to call it, the players and their starting stats. All right, so in biology, the word variation really just means the differences in characteristics between living things. And these differences, they basically come from two main places. First up, we've got inherited variation. Think of this as the genetic material you get directly from your biological parents. These are your starting base stats, things like your eye color, your blood group, or maybe certain genetic conditions. Then you've got environmental variation. These are the traits you pick up from your surroundings and your experiences. So having dyed hair, getting a tattoo, or even the accent you speak with. Now, a really brilliant way scientists figure out which is by studying twins over a long time. See, identical twins have the exact same genetics, but non-identical twins don't. By looking at what traits they actually share, scientists can untangle what comes from our DNA and what comes from the world around us. And remember, lots of things, like your height or your body mass, are actually a combination of both.
Okay, before we leave this level, we absolutely need to de-jargon two massive exam keywords, continuous and discontinuous variation. I know it sounds a bit complicated, but it's actually really simple. Continuous variation means a trait can be any value within a range. You aren't just strictly short or tall, you can literally be anywhere in between. If you plotted height on a graph, it would make this really beautiful smooth bell curve. Discontinuous variation, on the other hand, means you fall into strict, distinct categories. There is zero in between. Think about your blood group. You are either A, B, AB, or O. That's it. If you plotted that data, you'd have to use a bar chart. So just remember, smooth curve versus strict categories. Boom, easy exam mark secured.
Moving right along to level 2, competing to survive. Let's look at the rules of the game.
Okay, so animals and plants are constantly, and I mean constantly, competing for resources. Think about the shared stuff that both of them desperately need just to stay alive. We're talking space and water, but they also have very specific needs. Animals fiercely compete for food and mates, while plants are fighting this kind of silent war for sunlight and minerals from the soil. Simply put, if you don't win these resources, it's game over.
Now, to actually win those resources, organisms have to overcome some major challenges in their ecosystem. Examiners absolutely love these next two terms, so make sure you lock them in. Biotic and abiotic factors. So bio means life, right? Meaning biotic factors are all the living threats and challenges. That's predators trying to eat you, competitors trying to steal your food, and, well, the actual availability of that food in the first place. Abiotic factors, with that A at the front, means non-living. These are the environmental conditions you're literally forced to live in. Things like the temperature, the amount of rainfall, and the light intensity. To survive the game, you have to beat both the living and the non-living challenges. Level 3, adapting to the environment. This is how species level up. To understand how things adapt, we first need to talk about mutations. Okay, imagine your DNA is a giant, super complicated recipe book that contains all the instructions for building, well, you. Sometimes, when your cells are busy copying this recipe book, they make a tiny spelling mistake. In biology, we call this a mutation. Now, most of the time, changing just one letter doesn't ruin the recipe. The mutation does absolutely nothing. Other times, it accidentally ruins the cake completely, which results in a harmful genetic disease. But every now and then, and this is the genuinely exciting part, that tiny spelling mistake creates a brand new, amazing recipe. It's a beneficial mutation that gives an organism a brand new advantage. Think like naturally developing thicker fur in a freezing climate. So, when a beneficial mutation actually helps an organism survive, it becomes an adaptation. For your exam, you need to be able to quickly break down the 3 types of adaptations. Number 1 is structural. These are the physical features on the body itself, like growing sharp teeth to hunt or having massive ears to lose heat if you live in the desert.
Number 2 is behavioral. These are the actual actions an organism takes, so birds migrating south for the winter to stay warm, or apes learning to use tools to get hard-to-reach food. And number 3 is functional. These are the invisible internal processes. Think of a snake producing poisonous venom inside its body, or an animal altering its reproduction cycle so its babies are born in the perfect spring weather. So just remember, structural is physical, behavioral is an action, and functional is an internal process. A classic example of this is Charles Darwin. He famously spotted these structural adaptations when he visited the Galapagos Islands. He noticed that finches, a type of bird, living on different islands, looked pretty similar, but they had completely different beak shapes. And why? Because of the intense competition for food. On the islands with really hard nuts, the birds had evolved short, incredibly powerful beaks to basically crush them open like nutcrackers. But on islands where getting food meant digging tiny insects out of tree bark, the birds had evolved long, pointy, tweezer-like beaks. Their structural adaptations perfectly matched their specific environment.
Which brings us perfectly to level 4. Natural selection in action, the ultimate test.
Let's walk through one of the most famous examples of natural selection in UK history, the story of the peppered moth. So think about exactly how this happened. Before the Industrial Revolution, most peppered moths were pale. Why? Because they perfectly camouflaged against the light-colored bark of trees. A few mutant moths were born dark, but they stuck out like a sore thumb and got eaten by birds pretty quickly. But then, humans started building factories. The Industrial Revolution pumped out soot, and the tree trunks literally turned black. Suddenly, the whole environment changed. Now, it was the pale moths that stood out and were getting eaten. Meanwhile, the dark moths were perfectly hidden. So the dark moths survived, they reproduced, and they passed on their dark wing genes to their babies. Just a few generations later, almost all the moths in the area were dark. The environment changed, and the species had to adapt to survive. And guys, that is natural selection.
Okay, level 5, the rise of superbugs. This is basically a modern boss fight.
You know how doctors are always telling you to finish your entire course of antibiotics, even if you feel better? Well, here is the brilliant biological reason why. When you get sick with a bacterial infection and you start taking antibiotics, the medicine goes in and kills off the weakest bacteria first. Naturally, you start to feel a bit better, but the absolute toughest, most resistant bacteria are still clinging on inside you. If you break the rule and just stop taking your medication early because you feel fine, you leave those tough boss bacteria alive. And because bacteria reproduce so unbelievably fast, their DNA mutates quickly. These surviving tough bugs multiply, and they pass on their resistant genes. You have accidentally just acted as the natural selection for a brand new, highly dangerous, antibiotic-resistant superbug. Seriously, always finish your medicine. And finally, level 6, protecting Earth's biodiversity. Let's look at managing the game board. Let's nail down the exact exam definition for this crucial term. Biodiversity is the variety of organisms living in a specific area. And here is exactly why it matters. The greater the biodiversity, the more stable an ecosystem is. Imagine you have a forest with 50 different types of plants and animals. If a disease wipes out one type of plant, the ecosystem survives because there are plenty of other food options. But if your forest only has 2 types of plants and one dies, the whole system totally collapses. Basically, variety equals stability. But how do scientists actually know how much biodiversity is out there in the real world? Well, they use sampling. Now please, don't let the jargon scare you here. If you want to know how many daisies are in a massive field, you don't go out and count every single blade of grass. You use a quadrat, which is literally just a square frame you place on the ground. You count the daisies inside that one small square and then use that data to estimate the whole field. Or if you want to see how the plant life changes as you walk from a dark forest out into a sunny field, you use a transect, which is really just taking those quadrat samples along a straight line. It's simply smart, efficient measuring. And when we find out that biodiversity is dropping, we have to step in. So let's wrap up the syllabus with the real-world strategies humans use to maintain biodiversity and prevent extinction. First up is conservation. This means actively protecting habitats so they aren't destroyed in the first place. Second, breeding programs. This is where we take endangered species, help them reproduce safely in captivity to increase their numbers, and then reintroduce them right back into the wild. And finally, seed banks. Literally storing millions of seeds in giant freezing vaults so that if a plant ever goes completely extinct, we actually have the genetic blueprints saved to grow it again in the future.
And there you have it. You've officially made it through all 6 levels. From the inherited stats of your DNA to the fierce battle for resources, all the way to the epic reality of natural selection and superbugs. You now have the exact tools, the keywords, and the stories you need to absolutely smash this exam. But I want to leave you with one final thought before you go. Now that you actually know the invisible rules of survival happening all around us, how are you going to see the natural world differently on your next walk outside? Biology isn't just a dry textbook. It is literally the greatest story on Earth. Best of luck with your revision. You are going to do brilliantly. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer, and keep asking questions.